Welcome, everybody, to the show. This is Counterclipping show number 211 for February 24th, 2025. I'd like to thank everybody for coming out tonight. The one thing that I did forget was to update the banner, but we will just have to make, or the ticker, I should say, that we just have to make do with that. We are drinking Boulder Spirits Peated Malt. This is bottled at 45%. Am I remembering that correctly? 46%. So it's reasonably robust, and I did actually put a little bit of water into it, which I wouldn't normally do. We are clipping the Forgotten Battles, which I don't have up. As everybody, I think, knows why I have these particular games up in the background, and we'll get into that. But our topic is Omnigaming versus Wargaming, not in a fist fight type of sense. Hold on one second. There we go. But in the sense of why gamers transition to or from war games. I want to explore that topic with you folks tonight, and I'd like to thank everybody for coming out. Before we get any further, let me remind everybody to please do thumbs up the video. Please do subscribe to the channel if you are not subscribed already. There's a bunch of links to support the channel in the video description, so check those out. Big shout out to the patrons of Ardwulf's Lair, without whose support and encouragement we would not be able to keep doing this, and to our official sponsor, Noble Knight Games, from whom we will hear later on. I don't know what that even this note even is. I actually do have show notes for tonight, which I haven't for some time. I want to give a shout out in particular to new patrons Rich McKee, Arthur D. Filippo, and Jason Young. They are our new patrons, signed up in the last week or so. It's taken me a little bit of time to get caught up on that. Before we go any further than that, let's say hello to Chad Kennedy, Charles Latorre, Christophe DeClerc, Craig Alexander, Dale Brady, Daniel Silverthorne, Danny Gable, Danny Seckery, Dave Poirier, David Zell, Doug Blayart, Eric Goebel, Henry Hartman, Iggy Cricktal, the legend himself, Fucko is here, Jacob Guernsey, Jeff Anderson, Jeff Beeler, Joe Hammond, Joe Okabayashi, John Longshore is in the house, Jonathan Kay, Jonathan Dyer, Lee Grant, Lind Pratt from sunny Central Ohio, Manders, Meandering Mike, Molotov Cockatiel Games, Pounds of Division Lair, Paul Dangle, Paul Sin, Pawpaw, Perry Spiropoulos, somebody just popped in, and Joe Perez popped in. Joe, welcome back. Pete Bartlett is here. Welcome back, Pete. Real Time 01, Rick Cox, Rob Johnson, Ron Nicholson, Sean Sullivan, Stacking Limit, Stigler, Stuka Joe's here, The Tabletop's Edge. Doug, thanks for stopping by. Todd Cox, Todd Miller, Tony Mammal, Wade Moore, and Winterson. And I apologize to anybody, and Carl Fung, I apologize to anybody that YouTube has caused me to miss. Nature's Whisper, thanks for stopping by once again. We will hopefully have a little bit of a lively show this evening. But first, I've got news to go through, and we do have a new, as the last item in the news, there was a new campaign that I will announce tonight. The big news, of course, is the very sad news that came out 2 days ago now that Roger McGowan passed away. That is a tragic passing, and Roger will be sorely missed. Tributes are starting to flow out. We are going to give the family some space to mourn this, and we did a whole show on it last night. So if you would like to kind of watch Dan and I try to not break out crying about it, and combined with sort of a retrospect of Roger's best known and or most iconic covers, at least a selection of them, check out the Chit Show from last night. If you don't know, the Chit Show is now on Sunday night. I foresee that being the more or less permanent slot, since nothing is likely to arise to compete with it. Vicky, welcome back to the show as well. So, and then we have a GMT update. Actually, I'm going to do the new campaign first, thinking more carefully about it. All right, so as I think everybody probably knows, the official sponsor of the Counterclipping Show is Noble Knight Games, and we've done a number of campaigns to buy things that would otherwise be unattainable, but that I nevertheless would like to have and potentially do content on. So the new campaign is War in Europe. This is the Decision Games reprint. We are at about 15% right now. Noble Knight does have one in stock, and I don't know that this whole thing, I see I have made an error on the graphic, but I'll fix that later. This whole thing has gone far better than I anticipated. There is an affiliate link in the video description. If you click through that and buy whatever you were going to buy anyway at Noble Knight, then I get a little bit of a percentage in store credit. And once that piles up to the roughly $600 and some that War in Europe Revised costs, we will push the button more or less instantly, and it will show up, and I will show it off on the show, and hopefully we'll do video on it. I've played the original War in Europe. It's been a while now, but it is a noteworthy game in my opinion. So tune in or take advantage of that affiliate link. And the last I checked, there was, I'm going to pull this up because I need to do this anyway. I'm also going to throw a Noble Knight discount code into the chat, which ought to still be working, although I don't have any actual information on that. That is the discount code. Happy New Year. And the affiliate link for those thinking of buying anything is right here. I think we got that. Yep. Okay, cool. So there's that. And I will also throw in, as soon as I pull it up, a link to the Ardwulf's Lair Discord server. So check this out as well. That is turning into a fairly lively place to be these days. So, in any case, that is the typo. I didn't change the color. So, thanks to everybody about that, but I would have preferred to not have done that, to be honest, if you know what I'm saying. So, I'm not going to try and get into a Discord versus other platforms type of thing. If you're on whatever platform you're on and you're happy there, cool. But Discord allows for generally more focused discussion than a standard social media platform is capable of normally. So anyway, we got a few things coming in as of a couple days ago. So. All right, so let's get into the GMT update because this one might take a while. Fix that. All right, so as usual, if I'm not going to read the whole thing, I'm going to hit the highlights. If you want to read the whole thing, go ahead and go over and hit the update at gmtgames.com. So this came out on February 20th. Gene opens up here with pretty much their shipping situation. It's like the largest batch of shipping that they've ever had to do. They are saying it's going to be, they expect it to take 5 to 6 weeks to ship it all out. I'd give them some slack on that and call it more like 7 to 10 weeks, but we'll see how it goes. Gene also mentions the passing of Carla Horger that we mentioned either last week or the week before. That was also unanticipated by me. I knew Carla, and I know her husband, Jeff, and they are the co-designers of the Thunder Alley games, among a number of other things. So, best wishes to Jeff in this trying time, and of course, best wishes to Roger McGowan's family in this trying time. There's a GoFundMe here to help Jeff out. I will throw a link to that in the chat as well. I feel like I'm doing this a lot now, and I don't want to do this, but it is what it is. So here we are. All right, so the tentative launch of Rebel Fury is actually this Thursday, coinciding with the eye surgery that will not allow me to play any such thing. But it's worth checking out. Rebel Fury is a pretty neat game, and I will definitely pick that up, and it's probably pretty cheap, too. There is also a bundle of that along with Gettysburg and Waterloo, apparently, for a discount. And none of these are particularly expensive. Also announced last week while we were at Winterfest, and actually before this update, is that there is a digital implementation of Mr. President coming. I think that is being spearheaded by Ananda Gupta. I think this is an excellent fit to be adapted to a digital game, and it's on Steam. It's not out yet, but you can put it on a wish list. I have done that, so that's worth checking out. Now I'm almost certain to pick that up, to be completely honest. And there's a whole bunch of stuff about that, and here's even a Steam screenshot of what's going on there. Oh, look at this. I didn't even read this on my buzz through. I was a little busy last week, as you'll recall. So there's a 2-question digital survey regarding your favorite content creators. So let me throw that link in the chat, too. And I would appreciate it if anybody would put in Ardwulf's Lair as one of the top content creators, and you put PC games in there too. I was playing a little bit of Pathfinder Wrath of the Righteous over the last couple of weeks. Not that much because I haven't had the time, but I have been playing a little bit. Mr. President is also getting a second edition of the actual board game, and that ought to be out reasonably soon. But we'll see how this shipping goes. The winter spring sale, at this point, they are saying that it is going to happen in March. We will see if that actually happens. It will last for a week, will be for everyone, so you're not going to be limited by the number of P500 orders. It'll be a 40% discount. It doesn't say whether it'll be basically everything in the store, at least, but usually it's everything from GMT, and then sometimes some of the third-party stuff that GMT sells, most of which are European published games that sell in the US through GMT. Sometimes those are discounted, or some of those games are discounted and some of them are not. So watch for the announcement when they make it. There's some shipping drama here. There's nothing anybody can do about that, so I will ignore it. Read it if you want. The charging and shipping stuff, we'll get to all of that when we get down to the bottom. GMT talk, in this case, they're talking to Mike Sigler and Francisco Gradial. Francisco is the designer of Cuius Regio, which I'm very much looking forward to. There's a bunch of episodes of that available. Ermine and I, Napoleon, The Limits of Glory, which is an expansion for I, Napoleon, have made the cut already, so those are doing great. These other things have not. Do not sleep on Napoleon in Egypt, is my takeaway from that. Are we at the bottom here? Is everybody okay? I think so. All right, anyway, here is the back of the box to China's war, and interestingly, East is at the top of the map, which I'm not sure if Chinese maps have East at the top or not, but if they do, then cool. This is 37 to 41, the Second Sino-Japanese War, so not the whole conflict, but a big chunk of it. And this is a Brian Train design. I've been looking forward to seeing this. I have not pre-ordered it at this time, but it's about 60-40 that I'm going to end up picking this up one way or the other, sooner or later. Sam London wants testers for Microverse. I'm not sure what needs to be tested. I'm sure there's stuff that needs to be tested thinking about it, but in Microverse, when I played, it seemed pretty polished. Here's a GMT1 update from Jason Carr and their various solitaire efforts. Designer interviews all over the place. We, of course, had Stigler on the show a couple of weeks ago. Zilla Blitz talked to Mark Herman, the Player's Aid talked to David Doctor, El Wargamero Novato talked to Paul Hellier, 5 Games for Doomsday talked to Kai Jensen, Tony's Board Life talked to Colin Parsons, who's the designer of the latest Fields of Fire item, and of course the GMT talk thing that we already mentioned. New P500 editions, Over the Hills and Far Away, Bayonet and Musket Series Volume 2. This is the follow-up of 4, To Banish All Their Fears. It's got 2 battles that I am unfamiliar with. The battles of Steenkirk and Ramillies. I've heard of Ramillies because there's a British ship named after the battle, but Steenkirk, I have no idea. War of the Spanish Succession for Ramillies, and War of the League of Augsburg, also known as the 9 Years' War, for Steenkirk. I will definitely pick this up, I think. Moving back to the update, however, we also have Red Storm Southern Flank, a new expansion for Red Storm. I wish I knew where my copy of Red Storm was. I have to assume that I dumped it, even though I have a bunch of additional stuff. Away Team, I don't know. I think real time, this is, it's just the kind of design that it is it's a ton of work to do, is what that boils down to. There's like a lot of text to write, a lot of flow charts that have to be built and examined and checked and all that stuff. So it's happening. It's just taken a while. I don't know that I don't think the wait has been particularly surprising or unreasonable so far. Let me put it that way. There you go. For 433 and War at Sea. We also have a Last 100 Yards third printing. I'd like to try Last 100 Yards. I have not done so at this point. Recent P500 editions, take a look at this. We cover this every month. We've just covered these new editions. P500 removals. Spearhead, the balloon goes up. has been removed, and apparently it just didn't get much traction, and that game might find a new home at a different publisher. New P500s on the horizon. A game set in Southeast Asia. Don't know what that is. It could be a number of different things that I could think of. Something new from Volko. Again, I might have a whisper of what this might be, but Volko's got a lot of irons in the fire, so it could be any one of those things. Combat Commander goes to a new World War II theater. North Africa, perhaps? I'm not sure if there has been North Africa so far. I thought there was, but I could be wrong. And a new let's call it 194X game, according to this, from Mark Simonich. That's probably the Italy 43 game, I would think. But whatever it is, I will pick that up. As Marty provides a little additional context here. 200 pages of narrative, 200 plus cards, all of which have text on them, a lot of player aids and maps, and it all has to work together. So that's not a shock. And I think we've actually had that conversation with John Butterfield as well. It's going to be a lot of work to do. I thought that it was is that the Mediterranean box? I thought so. In that case, I'm not sure where we're talking. CBI, maybe? That's possible, I guess. That is considered its own theater, usually. All right, so conventions. We'll buzz through this real quick. Game More, April 3rd through the 6th. That's in Albany, Oregon. We have the Weekend at the Warehouse at GMT's warehouse in California. That is April 24th to 27th. There's GMT East on the same dates in Schenectady, New York. There you go. Marty will have more info. This is a full live playthrough of Ed Beach's Border Reavers from Heavy Cardboard. Cool. Watch that if you want to. Looks like that's all of those. Teaching videos for Adjustive Robin Hood from who? From Watch It Played. Congress of Vienna CDG solo card display is now available. I've got that coming whenever the shipment happens. So this is possible. Yeah, I mean, this would make sense as a thing to add to Combat Commander. Although it's, well, you know, you could consider that its own theater as well. Maybe, but I don't know if they're being that stuffy about it. It could be. I'd buy Poland 39, to be honest about it. All right, so if you haven't done so already, I would strongly recommend anybody interested in Roger McGowan's legacy to do pick up the book. It is wonderful. I have a flip through of it. It has just many, many memories just in the images alone in that book. Plus, there's a huge amount of text talking about Roger's life and his career and all that stuff. So it is a fitting tribute to Roger, and I'm glad that it came out. Counter trays are back in stock, which is great. I still haven't ordered my Combat Commander Throw. I got to get that done. How to play Fighting Formations. That if you're interested in that, check that out. A bunch of Inside GMT stuff, charging and shipping. Okay, so this is the big batch of stuff that is shipping more or less now. The 2024 replacement counter sheet, Adjustive Robin Hood 2nd printing, World at War 4th printing, mounted maps for World at War, and a 2024 supplemental counter sheet for World at War. Congress of Vienna, Downfall 2nd printing, the Downfall mounted maps plus the 3-inch box, the Fields of Fire Deluxe Edition, the update kit for Fields of Fire, fighting formations for the U.S. 29th Infantry Division, the 2nd printing of Hoplite, In the Shadows, and the Battle for Normandy Deluxe Edition. They're saying 5 to 6 weeks or something like that, so I wouldn't count on this stuff being done until at least the end of a couple of weeks into March is my best guess. Let me put it that way. The March sale, the only charge in March, it's looking right now. These things can always change. It's going to be by Swords and Bayonets, which we talked to Stigler about on the Chit Show just a couple of weeks ago. That looks extremely exciting. Looking at the production outlook. All right, so all right, so after the big shipment, they're back to normal. New government regulations. There's nothing GMT or I can do about that, so they'll just have to figure that out. The next shipment will also include blank boxes if anybody needs those. I've got a set of, I think last time I bought stuff from the sale, I bought some extra 3-inch boxes, so I've got a few of them. I don't need any of those at the moment. All right, so at the printer is American Revolution Tri-Pack number 2, Barbarossa Army Group North, second edition. There's no ship dates on these, but it's probably not terribly unreasonable to imagine these arriving at GMT sometime in the next 90 days, basically everything in this section. Maybe sooner than that, but I think 90 days is probably a relaxed estimate, let me put it that way. And that's not based on insider info. That's my best guess, but I tend to be not too far off when it comes to this particular kind of thing. All right, so we need water after that. Combat Commander Battle Pack number 8, Minor Nations. The fifth printing of Combat Commander Europe and the third printing of Combat Commander Mediterranean. So if they are in future printings, they are combining the two into a big 20th anniversary edition. So if you want the game as 3 boxes instead of 2, because Pacific's still going to be its own, then you might want to order these, and I would order them now because they're not making very many extras. John Madison, thanks for stopping by. So they pretty much charge, nowadays anyway, they pretty much charge everything on the same day. So they mean I got charged at about the same time you did, sometime around, something like that. And from charge date or from data newsletter, I would expect that you will see this stuff by mid-March, like I said. All right, where did I leave off? Combat Commander Resistance, second printing, Panzer Expansion number 4, France, 1940. A whole pile of stuff for Space Empires, including the 5th edition of the main game, All Good Things, the latest and last expansion, and reprints of the 2 previous expansions, Close Encounters and Replicators, along with the third printing of Talon. And The Bell of Treason and The Last 100 Yards, Volume 5 for King and Country. The only things that are moving up here are the things in bold. Going to the printer in late February, so basically any time now. And of course, you realize nowadays, I imagine everybody knows this, all that means is they have emailed the files to the printer. They've looked them over, everything looks fine, they've emailed them to the printer, and that's that. So it's not like they got to ship proofs or dies or anything like that over there. So, but that batch includes China's War, which we already looked at, Hubris, which is Morgan's game on the Successor Wars. Very interested in seeing that. And the second edition of Next War Taiwan. In final art and proofing. So I think that what this means is it's going to the printer late February or March. I'd count on March at this point. This batch includes Commands and Colors Napoleonics Expansion number 7, The Grand Battles. I need that. Combat Commander, this is the big combination of Europe and the Med. Cross Bronx Expressway, which I'm very interested in trying. North Africa 40, which is the expansion for North Africa 41. Seljuk from our friend Justigard over at that YouTube channel, which you should all be subscribed to. Third printing of Silent Victory. Fourth printing of The Hunters, Thunderbolt. And the Thunderbolt Deluxe Edition, which again, I've been waiting like 20 years for that, and Unconditional Surrender Western Campaigns. And for those folks who would like to try the Unconditional Surrender system, and I do think it's a neat system, I think this package is going to be the ideal platform to do that. Moving up into final art and proofing, supposedly going to the printer in Q2, includes Infernal Machine, the new edition of Mr. President, an update kit for that, a new edition of Unconditional Surrender, and the mounted maps for that. In May, off to the printer should be Italy 43. So I guess that 19X, that new Simonich thing's probably not this, actually. It's probably something else. Cool. I'll buy that. Yeah, me too. All right, off to the printer in June includes Baltic Empires, the Calixto bot for Cuba Libre, Firefight Tactical, the Plum Island Horror expansion. That sold like gangbusters. The Guerrilla Generation, which is another one of these coin multi-packs. The Weimar Republic, I'm very interested in seeing that as well, and the 20th anniversary edition of Twilight Struggle. And then I am not going to cover anything unless it has just shown up in one of these bottom categories, and there is nothing new down here. So, just spinning, I will zoom out now a little bit. Here is the box cover for China's War. I think it looks nice. Here is the box cover for Hubris. I like this too, although I worry that the title might get lost on a store shelf here. Here's the back for Next War Taiwan. I'm not ordering this. I have the old one. Minor Nations Battle Pack. This is the map from, or one of the 4 maps, or whatever it is, from the Guerrilla Generation. Sample counters for Firefight Tactical. How big are these counters? I hope they're going to be about this size, because there's a lot of info on that. Here is a graphic of the player aid cards for Thunderbolt. Those who have the older games in the series will recognize this as a massive graphical improvement from the monochrome things that we had in the old games. Not that that was a problem at the time. Nobody even noticed, but it'll be nice to have the extra bling in the new game too, since it will essentially, for those of us who ordered the deluxe edition, it will basically replace the old game as well. All right, here's the cover from Cross Bronx Expressway. I'm not sure how I feel about the landscape alignment, but other than that, cool. And I would assume that, I'm going to zoom into this because I would assume, now admittedly, my eyes are bad. I would assume that this design in the middle is the word Bronx, and I can't read that. So, I mean, I kind of see that it's there, but I don't know how they expect this to be marketable at a retail level with this title design. The game looks really interesting, and I'm looking forward to seeing it. All right, backing out of that. All right, anything else new here? A whole bunch of graphics, which I'm not going to zoom in on, not unless they're covers or something that we haven't seen before. Here's the cover for Thunderbolt. I think that looks great, too. And I think that is it for the GMT news update. So we can put that to bed and go back up here. So once I'll remind everybody to like the video if you haven't already. You know, maybe somebody who's better at reading that kind of text can read that. I can't. I just can't read that. But I'm old, so what can I say? Old and pretty crabby. There's Brant from the Gamma Trade Show, which is not a public-facing convention. It is in Louisville, Kentucky, for some reason known to no one. But Gamma, in their infinite wisdom, decided that Louisville was the logical place to hold their annual trade show, which is attended by publishers and retailers and some press and a bunch of other stuff. It looks like a neat event. I've never been there. One of these days, maybe I'll do that. But this year was not going to be that year. So maybe next year, probably not. But you know, I can think about it. Well, I mean, I might talk about this at the end of the show, actually. So I do feel like there is an art to graffiti, right? I mean, there's graffiti that's just like, you know, trash, but there's also artistic graffiti. That's a real thing. Yeah, I would think that this is a factor, but I mean, they moved from Reno, for Pete's sake. So why these are completely believable criteria, but then they were in Reno prior to this. So I don't know what's going on. We're, by the way, clipping German multi-unit formations, by the way. So I'm not sure that that's going to be a cover that pulls people in if they can't read what that word is in the middle. But like I said, the game sounds pretty interesting. It's a game basically about urban planning, and the costs and challenges thereof, all in multiple dimensions. And to me, that sounds pretty interesting. So Brant says they outgrew the building in Reno, which, okay, but you know, I think that thing pulls like 1,500 people, which, you know, at trade show size is not that big. So they could have found something else. Not that I thought Reno was a particularly intelligent choice either, but you know, there's that. Robert Lane is also looking forward to Hubris. I am very much. I've been monitoring Morgan's progress on that for quite some time, and I'm looking forward to it. Did I have anything else to go through as far as news? I don't think so. All right, so in that case, I guess I'll briefly talk about conventions. We did wrap up Winterfest last week. We had a great time. I had a stress moment and succumbed to the temptation of using tobacco. So I'm at about day 6 now, again, of no tobacco. It was just the one sort of half a day, but it happened, and we got to move past it. So there's that. I mean, this is logical, and this actually sort of peripherally touches on tonight's point, right? So I think those of us who have attended a wargaming-focused convention anytime recently will have observed that the audience at said event is primarily older, skews like big-time older, okay? Now, there's something... see, it in fact was the chewing tobacco. I did not smoke. But to me, chewing tobacco feels a little more dangerous because that's what I actually did for 30 years. I only smoked for 6 or 7. So, okay, way bigger this year. So maybe there's a lot of variables, right? What amenities and size and capacity and all that does the venue have? Those are all factors that I am not privy to and have done no research on. So Gamma might have had good reasons for moving to Louisville, but they just didn't communicate those reasons to me. And there's no reason to expect them to have done that. So, to be fair. I am shooting to quit entirely. So at the moment, I am vaping, which that's going fine. So if I were to go buy an e-cigarette from the gas station, that's going to give me about as much nicotine per puff as a cigarette would. That's about 50 milligrams of nicotine per liter of juice. 50. I am currently at 3. So we have cut, and I did cut really quickly. So I am aiming to be 0 nicotine and tobacco. It's always a struggle, right? So this is probably true. Another place besides baseball where chewing tobacco is extremely common is in the butcher shop, because you can't smoke there, but it was allowed to slide for years that you could chew tobacco there, and that's where I picked up the habit. So, on the other hand, there's plenty of good places to drink bourbon in Louisville, so there is that. I've driven through and stayed overnight in Louisville, and that's about it. On the way to Nashville. They do, I don't know if this particular brand is what's around, but they have you can find equivalent products. I did not find that this helped me. I also did not find that the patches or the gum helped me. They put me on some medication at one point, like actual pills, and that was bad. That did bad things, bad side effects. So we quit that. So I appreciate this, Athena, very much. And yeah, you know what? I've done it before and then was dumb enough to start doing it again. If nothing else, I can always remind myself of how much it friggin' costs. Because although I did buy about $75 worth of juice in the last week, that's enough juice to get me through like 5 or 6 weeks. Whereas I was spending $120 a week on actual tobacco products when I was still doing that. So, other than the $10 or so that we blew at the gas station last week, so at some point, it was just, it was one of those things where everything, absolutely friggin' everything was going wrong. And then the vape thing broke, and I couldn't do that. I'm like, fuck it, I'm going to the gas station to buy a dip. So, liquor has its own health impact, however. So, but I'm completely comfortable with my liquor intake. So, all right. In any case, so we've noticed the age demographic present at Wargame events, which includes Winterfest, but that's just my most recent example, right? And yeah, you see a few younger people, and we had a new younger person there this year, Nick, who played with us, and he was great. But well, that's there are health concerns about this particular product as well, but not the same health concerns. In particular, if you're consuming a combustion product, you're inhaling smoke, which the vape thing is not. It's vapor. It's literally just gasified fluid. There's no actual smoke or combustion byproducts in there. That's what is really bad for you. So, ugh. What? This seems crazy to me. I mean, I've seen what tobacco costs in like Connecticut, and it's crazy. And this is at least 4 times crazier. So I could tell you this: chewing for just through one can of dip in about 7 or 8 hours made my gums feel really weird and abraded. So yeah, I didn't get there. I didn't get there. I was close for about an hour, and that's when I stomped out and went to the gas station and came back half an hour later, much calmer. So. All right. Well, the expo is not a wargaming event either, right? You are fortunate if you have encountered wargaming at that particular event. And at Winterfest, that is what we are doing, right? So a counterexample of that, though, is CABS, which is the Columbus Area Board Game Society, which has been around forever, which was founded, whenever that was, by wargamers who would show up at these meetings every week and pretty much play war games. And now a couple of those people have passed on, of course, and a couple of those people are still wargaming but aren't wargaming there anymore. But the majority of the people who do war games still go there, but predominantly play other stuff. They play 18xx or Twilight Struggle or stuff like that, or just random Euros, right? So what the thing that I'm wondering is there a general trend of wargamers drifting away from war games into other kinds of games, regardless of what those other types of games might be? Tabletop RPGs, computer games, card games, collectible or not. Somebody probably has left wargaming to play chess. I don't know who that is, but there's probably somebody out there. And if so, what are the driving factors that push people into those other things? Because one of those things could be, I can't find opponents. Now, I think that if you're trying hard enough with the tool that the internet provides, you probably can find opponents. Even if they're not local, there's always things like Vassal and stuff like that. Is this a trend that was happening and isn't anymore, for example? Jonathan K., U.S. Civil War was on a table at Winterfest as well. This is excellent. So the Omnigamer thing, and I think probably a lot of our audience here is familiar with the term because Marco used to be Marco Wargamer, and now he's Marco Omnigamer, and he does occasionally cover war games, but he covers a lot of other different kinds of things. So, yeah, this is not recommended. I'll tell you what the least pleasant buzz I have ever had is a nicotine buzz. I was a heavy user and haven't really experienced that in a very long time. Brett Walda from Phalanx. I'd be curious to see that. The Brett Walda was the High King of Anglo-Saxon England, by the way. Heroescape, I don't care about that at all. All right, Athena is 24. Youngsters are battling hyper-internet use and the post-effective COVID isolation. Wargaming is almost certainly not the only... Yes. Well, that's absolutely true that it's not just wargaming, right? But wargamers have been complaining about this for decades now, right? People were complaining about this in the 70s. There's no young people coming in anymore. Well, there are young people coming in. Are the young people coming in to the extent that we want them to come in? And the answer to that is almost certainly no. We could always use more new blood. But importantly for tonight's topic is I'm interested in exploring the reasons why wargamers who are otherwise happy with the hobby might have cause to drift away and start preferentially playing other kinds of games. Now, some of us just by disposition play other kinds of games. I personally, and I guess by Omnigamer, we just mean that you play a bunch of different kinds of games, right? Perhaps not all the games as a literal interpretation of that or translation of that word would imply. But I have always been into both war games and RPGs, for example. I have intermittently been very into computer games, but that hasn't been the case in quite a long time. Well, I don't have to worry about getting into 40K because I can't afford it. If I hit the lottery and win the Mega Millions, I will consider playing 40K again, and I will not only hire people to paint the miniatures for me. I will hire people to buy the miniatures and play the game for me too, so I don't have to bother. And then I can play Case Blue instead. And I might hire people to play Case Blue, in fact, in that scenario. Robert Lane says that war games are exorbitantly expensive nowadays. Kids don't have as much money as fat old guys. So I do think this is there's kind of 2 points being made in Robert's post here. One of which is 100% obviously true. Kids don't have as much money as old fat guys. There is a certain, one of the things that I notice in a wargaming social event, right? Whether it's an online convention or an in-person convention or whatever, is less that the audience skews older. It does, but I also think it skews more toward people who have reached a certain life stage, right? They had the kids, or they didn't have kids, and they don't have to worry about it. They had the kids, and they're out of the house now. They've got a little bit of extra disposable income for that reason, and they can spend money on these games. Robert also says that war games are exorbitantly expensive nowadays, and of course Dan would disagree, and he believes that they are not expensive enough. I have always tried to apply the standard, and I've talked about this a million times already. I've always tried to apply the standard of, what are my entertainment options, right? I could go to the movies and I'll be out of the house maybe 3, maybe 4 hours if we throw dinner in there. But if we throw dinner in there, we're looking at like $150, which can buy as many as probably 4 war games if you pick inexpensive war games, and could buy one fairly expensive one for the cost of what would be 3 or 4 hours of entertainment that you might go out and do. Now, that's me and the wife going out and doing that too, so bear that in mind. But even so, I have always been pretty comfortable with an expensive or a high dollar value game as long as I believe I'm going to play it. Excellent point here from Molotov Cockatiel. Space is a factor too. Once the kids are out of the house, you might have that extra room that you can set up and keep the door closed and keep your war games set up for a long time. I do think that this is a factor. In contrast, something like a video game. Now, this tends not to be the case with the kind of video games I play, but there are video games that you could come down and play for 20 minutes and, get something done and feel like you relaxed a little bit and then go cut the grass or whatever it is that you're trying to do, right? This is a fair point too. And I will also observe that mass market computer games now, not weird things from Matrix games, mass market computer games are now starting to come out at a price tag of $80 or $90. So bear that in mind. So, Brant, we'll talk to you when John Stacy is finished with you. All right. Lee Grant says that young people are not as interested in history as we were at a young age. So this is our fathers probably served in the military, so there was some built-in interest in military history. Now, on the other hand, my dad was not in the military, but both my grandfathers were. And that was something I was aware of, but I was always into military history as a kid. So I'm not sure that's it. However, I do think there is a general societal trend in education that is pointing young people away from history and, in fact, from the humanities in general and into STEM fields, because that's, in principle, at least, where you can make more money, right? That's what they tell you anyway. So I think this is true to say that young people are not as interested in history, but I think that our educational system is driving them in those directions rather than just, their parents weren't in the military, right? Because all those kids have played Call of Duty. So I certainly didn't have the space, and this was just 3, 4, whatever it was years ago. I did not have the space to set up anything bigger than one map. And when I say one map, I mean one map. No add-ons, no nothing, no extra table footprint at all at the old place. All right. When Eric Schaefer was in college, they went out of their way to find a space that was large enough. Now, if you're depending on if you're in college, you might have the ability to reserve a room in a student union somewhere. And that's a thing that you could do. But on the other hand, there's that space factor for war games, especially war games that you don't complete in a single sitting, that you just don't have to deal with almost any other kind of game. I would say a miniatures gaming needs has a similar requirement, even though you might finish in a setting. You got to find a place to store all the miniatures and the terrain and all that other stuff that accompanies your participation in that particular hobby. This is also true. Many youngsters that they're not really youngsters anymore, are they? May have served in Iraq and Afghanistan. These guys are in my age group now, right? Well, perhaps not quite that old, but. Joe Green says, is there as much military history in popular culture in terms of movies and TV shows as there was back in the 60s and 70s? I don't think there is, but I'm not sure that that's not the same educational trend taking effect. And don't forget that there are economic things that are telling Hollywood or the TV studio or whatever entertainment producers what they are going to make and what they think people want to see, right? Marvel started hitting it big with the superhero stuff, and now there's 75 superhero movies a year, most of which are Marvel, but, DC will do something occasionally. And, some of them are good. So, but you can do a lot of things with CGI now that simply weren't possible, and that makes it easier to make certain types of science fiction and fantasy movies that might get preferentially made over a war movie. And I don't necessarily think that the difference is necessarily that big, right? It's not like we saw 10 war movies a year in the 70s, right? We might have seen one or two, and we probably see one or two now. Although I do think that we used to see more war movies and TV shows in past years than we are seeing now. All right, Joe asks, will ever come a time when games on Vassal look so good that you won't want to buy the real thing, would drive the prices down? I'm not positive that it would drive the prices down. For one thing, if let's say, let's take an imaginary publisher, and let's call it ABC Games, as publishes war games, and they do 5 war games a year. And they print 1,500 copies of each of those war games. And they print 1,500 copies because they think they can sell 1,500 copies. Maybe not instantly, but they will eventually get sold. If they suddenly became only able to sell 750 copies, then their economies of scale get thrown out of whack, and the games turn out to be more expensive, not less expensive. That said, we tend not to in the gaming sphere at large, not limited to war games, we tend not to see as consumers the benefit of that economy of scale. For example, Starfield sold, 20 million copies or whatever. So how many copies did they actually manufacture? Probably less than the 20 million, because they probably sold a lot of them just digitally. I didn't buy a physical game. I just bought it on Steam. So I would say that is an indicator of a deeper economic question than necessarily competition from Vassal, right? There is that sort of tactile element that you are simply not ever going to get in Vassal. There are advantages to Vassal too, over and above the fact that you can play with somebody from anywhere else in the world. And you might not have any noticeable setup or teardown time, and that you can play at a pace that you select, and in a time slot that you select. But there's that tactility of playing with physical components that Vassal cannot give you. Athena says a lot of folks in the age range are very much interested in history, but may prefer to play a video game about World War II rather than a board game. And that's, I think you can understand why somebody might make that decision, because it's just less work to play. I don't necessarily mean the complexity of the rules either. I mean the handling of all the pieces, right? I'm sitting here punching a game. I don't even know off the top of my head how many pieces are in this thing. But it's a lot. It's a lot of pieces. And setting this up, I have to manage that. We might decide to play something not Forgotten Battles at Buckeye Game Fest in a couple of months, because it'll have less setup time. It'll still be OCS, I think, but Jacob Guernsey is a history teacher and says there's still an interest in military history, but there's a big emphasis on STEM. Yeah, but nobody thinks there's money on that. A lot of people, too, are interested in history, but are interested in history in a casual way, right? People who watch... I was about to foolishly use the History Channel as an example. That's obviously stupid. Watch history videos on YouTube, Kings and Generals, or whatever. There's a million of them, or Draconiffle, or whatever that dude's name is. It talks about ships all the time. So this is, again, Drew here is saying that wargaming, like a lot of hobbies, tends to price out younger players, and I do think that this is a factor. I'm not sure it's the deciding factor. And in the context of today's question, we're talking about people who play war games and who move away from war games to play other kinds of stuff. Is that because it's easier to arrange one way or the other, right? Either there's a lot less handling, a lot less setup time. It's easier to find people to play with. These are all conceivable, and they're all probably a factor to some extent. Well, yeah, this is true. Stigler says that Vassal modules pretty much do use the digital nowadays. If they're done correctly, they'll use the digital artwork directly and not use scans. It's when they use scans that you tend to see the uglier renderings in Vassal. So, Frank, you are not alone in this. Has trouble seeing the map and units well enough on Vassal, better off with physical components. According to the eye doctor, he has 20/20 vision. I don't. So one thing that I will say, and I think Stigler might back me up on this, is if you really want to play Vassal and you're really having problems kind of visually grasping everything that you need to see on the screen, hook it up to a television. Get a 4K TV. They're not that expensive. They're a few $100s. And I mean a TV, not a monitor, because a 4K monitor, a big 4K monitor, will cost quite a bit of money. But you can get like a 50-inch plus 4K TV now for like less than $500. It's probably even less than that. I have not priced these. And you will be amazed at the difference it makes to have a big screen at 4K resolution for Vassal. It makes a huge difference. All right. Holden Messerschmitt's son loves the Punic Wars. There you go. Great topic. Yeah, and I let me jump in on this too. I fully agree with Stigler on this. Well, I don't doubt that some cheapskate somewhere will pick up the Vassal module and play out of that rather than buying the game. I think when you look at the plus and minus of that, I would bet money that the existence of a Vassal module or Vassal incarnation sells more copies than it prevents from being sold due to quote-unquote piracy. Usually, what drives piracy is not people are just cheap. Usually, it's that there is an accessibility issue where they cannot get the game. Or whatever it is, right? Rather than generally, if people have the money, they'll go buy it. And so, plenty of times I've, looked at a Vassal module of a game I'm interested in, and then ended up going and buying the game, right? In some cases, whether I played it or not. Athena mentions youngsters may be concerned with entertainment first, so a video game would be more entertaining. I do think that there is an intellectual aspect to war games that isn't necessarily shared by absolutely everybody that plays war games. On the other hand, I tend not to play those kind of games. Well, that's not true, but the kind of games I gravitate towards are the big, heavy hex and counter things, and those are pretty intellectual just because of the amount of math and number of pieces that you have to have. Jeff T is asking about magnets. We may do something on this topic at some point because it's an interesting way to play. But it also creates, who was I talking to that has a whole magnetized wall of stuff? I forget who I was talking to at Winterfest that is vertically gaming. Ian mentions good points about space and income, reduced attention spans, and even worse, increasing isolation. Getting into wargaming is easier if someone explains it. So I do think that this is true of every type of game. This is true of tabletop RPGs too. It's always easier if someone is there to help you get into it. It's always easier. Even if that person is not themselves an expert, at least you are sharing the confusion and the experience of being confused. Now, and reduced attention spans, that's probably a factor, but I don't feel qualified to talk about that. But like this sense of isolation that we have a lot of times nowadays, just being on the internet, it is weird. And I think that could be a factor that could be driving people away from analog games into digital games. But as we've also seen, the predicted demise of analog games in competition with video games is not only didn't happen, the exact opposite happened. And analog games of all kinds are experiencing something of a renaissance. This is true of board games. This is true of war games. This is true of tabletop RPGs. You can now buy D&D branded coffee. I mean, I would have, my eyes would have flown out of my head if I had seen that at age 13, right? So the people making the money decisions have begun to recognize that the people who are into this stuff, sometimes at least, have money to spend on stupid stuff like D&D branded coffee. I have no idea how good the coffee is, and I'm not going to find out. Drew has dabbled in RPGs and computers and miniatures. I've done miniatures in the past, but I'm not doing miniatures again for reasons of I'm a cheapskate. I mean, like I said, yes, I am positive that some people do in fact do this, but I think a lot more people see that there's a Vassal module, maybe check the Vassal module out, think to themselves, I don't have anybody interested in playing this here in Dubuque, but I can find somebody somewhere on Vassal, and there's like BGG is a place that I could do that on, or there's Facebook groups for that too. So I will pick this game up, right? Or something like we had this out with Bill at the time, Brotherhood and Unity, which is a 3-player game, which really works best with 3 players. There was no Vassal module available for that for quite a while, and that was a problem. 3-player games are unusual. And I think there's a way to do it with 2, but it's just not going to be as good, which is always the case with 3-player games in my experience. I think, Joe, I kind of see what you're going at here, but I think that if there's a platform that is going to do that, it is more likely to be Tabletop Simulator or another analog. And I will remind folks that you can run Tabletop Simulator in VR. I have not tried that. And in fact, since we moved here, my VR headset has remained in its original box that it was moved in. And I don't think this computer can actually handle it at this point. So that's my official excuse. Even though on paper it certainly ought to. And the majority... I'm not sure that it's true to say that the majority of publishers have Vassal support or at least endorse Vassal support. But I do think it is definitely correct to say that the majority of games have Vassal support, or war games at least, have Vassal support at this point. But part of that is, GMT and MMP, who are on the larger side of publishers in this space, GMT especially. And GMT enthusiastically supports Vassal, so that's like a lot. Like, I'd have to actually run numbers on this to know if this was actually true or if I'm just talking from my ass, as happens from time to time. But it wouldn't shock me if GMT's annual output of new games equaled everybody else in Wargaming's output of new games on an annual basis every year. It wouldn't surprise me if GMT was responsible for 50% of new war games. I don't know that that's true. it really warrants further investigation, which I am not going to do. So GMT, not everything they do is a war game, where like MMP, pretty much everything they do is a war game, but they might release 10 things a year, only a couple of which will be new games. Whereas GMT is probably going to release something like 20 to 30 new games a year, right? All right, Todd Cox doesn't think prices can go much lower unless the games scale back production values. Don't forget that we are in an economic environment right now where there's a lot of uncertainty, and that is going to tend to drive prices up in general, and that applies to games as well. Even if we don't necessarily see a corresponding increase in, say, shipping costs specifically, the things like shipping costs, we can kind of guesstimate because we can go to the post office and say, what would it cost to ship this package? But for things like printing, it's really only the people on the inside who are getting quotes from printers who are going to know what those numbers look like. So I am disinclined to second guess the publishers on this particular question. I will say, as much as it pains me to admit this, I have some sympathy for Dan's position in saying that probably hobby games are not as expensive as they ought to be. That would be bad for me if they were more expensive, right? But on the other hand, I have some level of admiration for people who can like stick with a small number of games and just get good at those as opposed to playing different stuff all the time. That's just not the kind of gamer I am, unfortunately. I tend to move around inside a space, so like RPGs or war games or something like that, and try a lot of different stuff inside that space, rather than trying different stuff in all kinds of different modes, right? Somebody like, what's a good example? So somebody that plays, an avid player of, I'm trying to think of the name of the game. Well, let's use Twilight Struggle as an example. An avid player of Twilight Struggle might play other war games, and they might not. I don't think them playing Twilight Struggle is necessarily going to tell us that one way or the other. So, well, this is one reason why I gradually came around to the idea of having a war game area on the floor at Origins, because they can be visually appealing. Even Hex and Counter war games. And if we were all up in our own room, marinating in our own lack of deodorant, it would be less easy for randos to wander in and say, oh, this looks neat. Let's try, what's this called? Case Blue? Let's try this. So, another thing is, I heard about this. I was aware that there was I don't know if it's still there or not, maybe it is, a poker tournament at Origins, and that a lot of the people who used to participate in the Starfleet Battles Captain's Hat tournament turn around and started doing the poker tournament, and a lot of the winners, or the people who did really well in that poker tournament, and I think Drew was one of them, also had done pretty well in the Starfleet Battles tournament, which does not take place at Origins anymore. And these digital implementations, I don't feel like we've seen the whole story of how digital implementations of analog games are really going to develop. In some cases, we have now seen that flip-flop multiple times. So, for instance, Europa Universalis came out, and whenever that came out as a board game from Azure Wish, it got turned into a computer game that went through several incarnations of that, and eventually it was turned into another board game that isn't particularly similar to the original board game. It much more closely resembles the computer game. So that can go either way. And there's the analog Stellaris board game that Academy Games is working on. There's a Rome Total War board game that somebody did. I don't know who. There's a Hearts of Iron board game that somebody's doing as well that just got kickstarted. So this does go both ways, and I'm not sure that we have seen all of the dimensions of this particular question yet. All right, very good, Carl. Excellent choice. I am an oaf. We were using these little plastic blocks to mark various units and stuff like that during the GTS game, and I was constantly dropping them on stacks of counters and stuff like that. You know, this is true, but a lot of computer games have now. Bear in mind, you know, from who is saying this, right? It's me, and I tend to gravitate toward more complicated games. So, more complicated games tend to have tutorials, but they also tend to be shitty tutorials. I'm not convinced that the tutorials for command modern operations are worth a shit at all. For example, there are other examples I could think of. But I do think that like the learning barrier is real, but there are also ways around Draconiffle. That's the boat guy. I do think that the learning curve is real as a barrier to entry. But I also think that there are enough ways around it that we just kind of conveniently tend to forget. If you know somebody who's already playing it, they can teach you, right? And in which case, yeah, it might take you some amount of learning time to get your hands on it, but you could figure it out, right? With help? Yeah, why not? Unless your tutor is an asshole, in which case, I guess you find a better tutor. All right, I am going to take a 30-second break while we hear from our good friends at Noble Knight, while I attempt to do my best to catch up on the chat. I am somewhat behind, so let's take it away, Noble Knight.
Here at Noble Knight Games, we've been carefully growing the world's largest selection of board games, role-playing games and dice, war games, miniatures and paints, card games, and more. Going on 25 years now. Our rustic castle contains more game and hobby goodness than you can shake a stick at. Complete with careful packaging and the finest customer service the land can provide. You can buy, sell, trade from anywhere in the world, just like nature intended. Noble Knight Games.
All right. Thank you, Noble Knight, the official sponsor of the Counter Clipping Show. Why is everyone messaging me at this exact time? All right. Wargaming in general is also not known about. I do think this is true. If say the middle-aged lady at the grocery store, you run into them and try and explain Wargaming to them, I think they will be completely baffled. And to whatever extent they do understand what you are talking about, I think they will think it is the little miniature stuff, right? So it's not necessarily wargaming anyway. Certainly has not reached the kind of pop culture cachet that, say, Dungeons and Dragons has now, right? And it's not even just D&D. There's a lot of activity around people doing tabletop RPGs, and a lot of it's D&D, but not all of it. So. This is true too. And I can understand this, although I've been around long enough to know that if I'm not getting along with this person that I'm playing with, I can find somebody else to play with, right? That's not necessarily obvious. I will tell you that I managed to do about 20 minutes of VR Skyrim before I couldn't take it anymore. On the other hand, I managed to play Elite Dangerous in VR with essentially no trouble, except that the whole inside of the mask ends up getting fogged up. That was my only problem with that. And these glasses are enormous, and the goggles do not fit over them. So there's that. This is true too. I wish. So I have been hitting... I hadn't done this until pretty recently. I actually have been, for the last several weeks, have been kind of visiting the local game stores here in Akron, Ohio. A couple of, at least one of which is actually not in Akron, it's in Cleveland. And that's the Warzone, the legendary place. And not very many of them have much of a selection of either war games or RPGs. We've got a local place up here. It's like 8 minutes from us. It's very convenient. The fellow who runs it's a very nice guy. He's mostly a comics store, though. He's got a decent selection of board games of various kinds, and some D&D stuff, and just a handful of other things. So that is there's also... So... As somebody who spent a lot of time in game stores in the 90s and 2000s, and then probably less after that, for a variety of reasons that won't necessarily be obvious, game stores potentially offer two things. Okay, they are a place for you to go and buy your games and gaming stuff. Okay, great. And at one point, that's how you got it. It was either mail order from the publisher or through a relatively small number of retailers that did mail order, or you went to a store, right? Who's doing that now, right? So I can go if I want. Admittedly, I don't necessarily have a great selection going to Amazon, but the selection is not zero either. I can get GMT stuff or Wizards of the Coast stuff on Amazon, right? And it'll just show up magically like every other Amazon thing does. There are also other places like Noble Knight or Miniature Market or Enterprise Games and a variety of other places that you could go to online. And Noble Knight in particular, I can get, I mean, not anything at any specific time, but I mean, chances are if I'm looking for something, even if it's weird, they will get it sooner or later, probably sooner, right? So the overwhelming majority of game purchasing nowadays happens on the internet, right? And we should not be shocked by that. I don't think that's news or a surprise or anything like that. On the other hand, the other role that a game store is capable of fulfilling is as a social hub for the people into those games. And that is the kind of thing that is less easy to do on the internet. There are certainly places you could go to hang out, but let's say I go to the Facebook Wargamers group, for example, and say, hey, I'm looking for a player for Guns of August. I mean, there's 15,000 people in that group, or whatever the number is now. It's probably more than that. But what are the chances are that somebody in my immediate area is going to be in there too, be interested in the same game and see it? Now, if I can find a different site where it's like, here's a group that's specifically dedicated to Old Avalon Hill people or specifically dedicated to wargamers in Northeast Ohio, I might have better luck. Whereas if I'm in the game store and I run into somebody browsing a copy of Guns of August on the shelf, I already know what they're interested in, right? And they're there. So chances are they're local. In having that communal play space and communal area, the good game store can be like a gaming community center. This is my idle fantasy, by the way. If I ever do win the Mega Millions, that's what's happening. It's going to be the Ardwulf's Gaming Valhalla. I will open up a 100,000 square foot facility somewhere here in Northeast Ohio, and it will just be games everywhere. We probably sell games too, but it will mostly be a community center where people can play games. And I say I'd have to win the lottery to do it because I am not under any illusions about that being a viable business model. I think Bill is wrong on this. I think Bill is just flatly wrong on this. I'm not the only person that thinks that. A whole bunch of people have yelled at him about it. I'm not going to yell. Including me. I'm not inclined to do it anymore. Bill has moved to a considerable degree from where he was a couple of years ago, and I am glad about that. I think this is short-sighted. And it ignores the reality of the community, which is that most of the people in our community are not dickheads. So, all right, I think this is a significant factor. Jeff mentions Vassal has a ton of positives, but he sits in front of a screen for 8 hours every day for work and doesn't want to do that in his free time. Yeah, no kidding. Most of my hobby time is spent in front of this friggin' computer too. If you think about it, all this everything for the channel happens in front of this computer. So absolutely, I want to get out of here from time to time and go play some stuff. All right, I did sort of get caught up in the chat, but I'm already behind again. Compass was pumping out a lot of games for a while, for like a year or so, and then they did slow down a little bit. Nowadays, I think it's a release or two a month, and that seems to be the cadence that Compass is pretty comfortable with. That does mean that some stuff got pushed back, though. So there's that. I completely agree with Frank on this. One of the reasons I'm interested in war games is because I'm interested in history. And unlike, say, watching a movie or reading a book about whatever interesting topic we might have a game about, the game presents you with a dynamic model of that situation. Now, to what extent that model is good depends on a lot of things, including me as the player and how I'm internalizing that model. That's something that you can't really get and might give you more insights, or at least different insights, than reading a book might, or at least a game might more easily show you certain things that a book might have to take a whole chapter to explain, right? Where a game can have a simple mechanic that just, boom, here it is. Blue Steel says Twilight Struggle was the gateway, and I think that this is not super uncommon, but perhaps not as common as people imagined it to have been at the time, back in the great heyday of that 10-year period where Twilight Struggle was just locked in as the best board game ever, according to BGG. Hexy's here. Thanks for stopping by, and I saw Mo here too. Mo, thanks for stopping in. I will away team. No. That's an interesting way to phrase that, though. There is no formal connection between the two. Let me put it that way. Away team, if anything, is inspired by a couple of games that John Butterfield had done in Ares magazine back in the very early 80s or possibly very late 70s. Wreck of the BSM Pandora, and there was another BSM Pandora game. Although mechanically this feels different, Away Team feels different. It is definitely some kind of spiritual successor to those games, except bigger. It's bigger in scale in basically every dimension. Honestly, I learned how to play Hearts of Iron 3 is the one that I actually got okay at. Honestly, watching YouTube videos. So... Todd Cox is not sure how new players even come into the hobby now. It's a good question, right? How do new people come into the hobby now? I would say that in general, if you had there's a great story about, I'm probably going to mangle this, but I'm going to try and tell it anyway, and I'll try to be fast about it. When Wizards of the Coast, and I think it was Wizards of the Coast at the time, I don't think the Hasbro had picked him up yet, was doing the Star Wars RPG. And they had this big event of the release party at a Hard Rock Cafe somewhere. I don't even know where it was. It might have been in Vegas, actually. Would have made the most sense. And they're having this event, and they've got like a bunch of these games of people playing Star Wars D20. And this older couple comes in, and this old couple from Britain come in. And they're looking around, and they're just like tourists that wanted to eat at a Hard Rock Cafe. And they start asking questions about what is this? And they had weren't familiar with Star Wars. They may have been vaguely aware that it was a movie at some point. And they managed to get talked into playing. And apparently this old guy was like some former commando and immediately started, okay, you are going to do this, and blah, 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 and immediately saw what was going on in the game and got it. Mark Herman tells a similar story about some friend of his who's a retired admiral or something like that Mark took like 10 minutes explaining the Empire of the Sun rules to him, and he got intuitively got it, and he was a very formidable player. So, I think that there's a lot of people who might like these kind of games, regardless of what kind of specific kind of game we're talking about, who just don't know what is going on. The old couple, by the way, ended up picking up the Star Wars D20 book and taking it back home. So, and apparently they were going to, run it at the old folks' home or something. I don't know. All right, growing gamers. Yes, I am growing horizontally more than in any other dimension at this time. High school kids. Yeah, but high school kids have... So on the one hand, high school kids probably can't drive unless they're very late in their high school careers. And on the other hand, they've got more free time than adults do. They got more free time than me. So it works both ways. And you can probably talk the neighborhood kids into playing D&D with you or something like that. I did that with D&D and war games and stuff like that. So, and if I can do it, I figure it can't be that difficult, right? Oh yeah, this is hilarious actually. This is a World at War is this really big, super complicated World War II strategic level thing. There is a hilarious and quite lengthy, as I recall, post from somebody who would kind of come into it and talked his girlfriend into playing it. And I believe her response was, "What is this?" So, but that said, sometimes don't let those gender or whatever preconceptions of somebody's background get in the way either. We've had a number of interesting things happen at Origins where somebody random will come by and they're not necessarily in our normal demographic that we associate with war games, and they're super into it. So these things do happen. I haven't tried this. There are people, John Walker, U.S. agent, welcome to the show, does have, there is a thing that I don't personally get, where there are people who will watch RPGs being streamed on Twitch or YouTube or whatever it is, who don't play those games and who are just watching it for entertainment value. I do not understand that at all. As somebody into those games, and maybe this is what's in my way, I find it very difficult to watch RPG streams in general. So, there was nothing. Is there a good term for? So, let me take us mentally back to something like sometime between 1979 and 1984. Take us into the world of hobby gaming, which is a super duper niche thing at the time, right? And hobby gaming at that time looked like a pretty small number of board games, mostly very amateurishly produced, role-playing games, hex encounter or board war games, and miniatures games. That's what hobby gaming looked like at the time. And there were a bunch of terms that got kind of floated around that to encompass all of that at the time. Adventure gaming was something that SPI used at least a couple of times, for example. I tend to use the word hobby gaming. I don't think that's a particularly good or clear term, but is there a term for that, right? But now I guess to exclude the collectible card game people and the computer game people, right? I don't think those people should be excluded. Don't get me wrong, but is there even a term to describe people who are into this older style of game and not necessarily into these newer styles of games? I'm not sure that there is, nor am I sure that such a term would even be valuable if there was, except perhaps for branding a YouTube channel. The internet has killed the retail game market in general, right? There are. I wonder. It's been a while. I spent my time in gaming retail, okay, a number of years, and that was all a long time ago, and I'm not sure what it looks like nowadays. But I would be curious to know. Let's say you've got, your game store sells a copy of what is that? Ace shit. Well, let's say Twilight Imperium, okay? Maybe that's a bad example because it's expensive. Let's say Arkham Horror. That's probably also expensive, but we'll run with it. How many copies of Arkham Horror does your game store sell versus how many copies of, say, the D&D Player's Handbook does it sell? I don't know what that number is, and of course it's going to vary by store too, based on the audience that store has established. Yeah, if you are looking for, they've got a whole wall in the warehouse that's just parts. So if you're looking for something, I'm missing maps for Twilight of the Highway to the Reich, for example, I could call them up tomorrow and see if they have them. So I have not bought a war game off of Amazon for a while, and it's easy to not, because pretty much, if you buy war games on Amazon, the only things that you're going to see are some stuff from Hasbro or a license from Hasbro, and GMT stuff. And the GMT stuff tends to be just as cheap if you order from GMT or Noble Knight or whoever. So, Board wargamers, Bert, is a term I tend to use now too when I'm talking about hex encounter wargames. Because of course, you know, war games that don't have hexes is not new, right? That's something that we were seeing that's how they got started, right? The old Tactics 2, the original Gettysburg from Avalon Hill in '58 or whatever that was. That did not have a hex map. That was a square grid. And nobody who isn't a total lunatic is going to try and make the case that those are not war games because there's no hexagons. Unless they're kidding, and which is something I might do, for example. This is true, and I do think that the featuring of Campaign for North Africa on The Big Bang Theory was probably a factor in why it's as expensive as it is nowadays. But in fairness, it was still expensive before that. So, well, Amtrak, I'm not sure what you're replying to here, John, but Amtrak does go through Cleveland. So you can Amtrak your way to and from Cleveland. A lot of other places you can't, but Cleveland you can. This is not a terrible idea, actually. Robert Phillips mentions Miniature Market, who does have at least a couple of retail stores. They just changed ownership in the last year or two, and I'm not sure if that has had an impact. I have occasionally ordered stuff from Miniature Market, and I had a pretty good experience with Miniature Market. Nowadays, I'm more inclined to shop with Noble Knight, but guess why, right? So, and Miniature Market doesn't sell older stuff, too. So if you're looking for new stuff, and their wargame selection, while good for online retailers not named Enterprise Games or Noble Knight, it's pretty much GMT and Worthington and a couple of... They don't carry MMP products, for example. That's why I was buying through Cool Stuff for a while, because unlike all the other online retailers, other than Noble Knight, they carried MMP, and then they stopped, so I stopped shopping there. So I appreciate the sterling work you and others have done in this department, Mo, in talking sense into Bill. I appreciate that is a difficult and challenging task. So, well, yeah. So this is a real thing, though, right? So, as GMT is finding out this month, right? They have like they have X number of people that work in the warehouse. I don't know what the number is. That's why I'm saying X. And X number of people can get X number of boxes out a day or a week or a month. And if they're going to release 15 things this month, then they're going to get backed up, right? So Bill's decision to do this, to spread things out, even though he might have it sit in the warehouse and ship it at a pace that his warehouse team is sustainable, that makes perfect sense to me. Oh, I know this place would be like just out in the middle of not out in the middle of nowhere. I'd put it in something like I'd put it somewhere kind of close to highway access, but perhaps not too close. And it would be a huge facility that would have everything. It would be like a VR center, but it would be the kind of games that I like, and that pretty much means war games and tabletop RPGs. And I wouldn't do card games. And if anybody asked for card games, I would have a flyer on the wall that said, "Need card games? Here are a bunch of local places where you can go get card games." We don't do that here. There is plenty of places for you to do those things. That is, from a business standpoint, that is stupid, by the way. But again, this is an idle fantasy and not a business plan. Burning Banners seems to be doing extremely well. I want a copy of it, I can tell you that. I'm trying to get caught up on the chat here, folks, and I am currently about 15 minutes behind. The reason why I was thinking about this too, to be honest, and the reason I talked myself out of it is because Away Team was coming out. So, because those games actually look pretty cool. Several of the Ares magazine games look pretty cool. That Albion game looks pretty cool to me. Now, Carl is doing a great service here for wargaming in general in doing this. If we could only get somebody out here in the north, the northern, our area to run the Wargame boot camp. Carl, find somebody that's out here. So Brant and the Armchair Dragoons do this to some extent. But Brant can't be everywhere, and frankly, Brant's doing more than is really humanly possible for one person to get done already. That was disgusting. I apologize. Anyway, John Weeble, thanks for stopping by. Recently returning to Wargames, but generally prefers miniatures because of replayability. It'll be those 3 hexes whose control determines who wins, and historical miniatures never go out. So I have considerable respect for people that do miniatures. I don't do miniatures, and I make fun of it and talk about dirty miniatures and the miniatures infections and all that stuff. But really what it is I don't have the time to deal with the miniatures themselves. I will say, however, that board war games have advanced a long way from the 3 magic hexes on the board. There are still games like that, but not all of them necessarily. Tony from Tony's Board Life just got back from ice skating. When I did ice skating, it was more like ice falling, of me falling onto my ass on the ice. I was not a skilled ice skater. I think Joe's talking about Twilight Struggle here, and this is a good point. I mean, this is probably true, to say that even if Twilight Struggle is not a war game, which is not a question I am going to answer to anybody's satisfaction except myself. Let us take the stipulation that Twilight Struggle is not a war game for the moment. Even if that is true, it is also wargame adjacent. It's published by a publisher who does wargames. It's stocked on shelves with wargames. It is designed by people who play and design wargames. So it is definitely adjacent, and whether it's a wargame or not, I think is less important to its position sort of on the periphery of wargames. We need those games too, right? We need the kind of games that will appeal to wargamers, but will also appeal to people who are not currently wargamers, but are potential future wargamers. And I think that certainly Twilight Struggle has been that game for some people. All right, I'm just working on it here. Expanse RPG on Twitch for 3 years now, and it's a great campaign. I will say that... okay, a couple things. So I will say that if you are like a regular follower of a specific group of people doing an RPG, it's a lot easier to get into that because you'll kind of get to know the people, right? So if you keep watching it, getting into it in the first place is difficult to do. John Walker says that watching RPGs is big in Japan, according to Chaosium. I think that I'm positive you are correct, because Call of Cthulhu is huge in Japan. Why? I'm not sure, but it could be that there's a synergy between Cthulhu and Godzilla, perhaps. I have no better theory, but Call of Cthulhu is huge in Japan, and of course, Chaosium will be tuned into that. I have tried, including recently, I tried again to get into Critical Role, and it's just not working for me. I can generally deal with the glass cannon, but Critical Role just doesn't work for me. And, maybe I need to start at the beginning of one of the later campaigns or whatever, but then we run the risk of them doing something that I'm less interested in too. So, all right, Christoph doesn't see much difference between Euro games and war games. It's both about winning. Is it to have more tokens at the end or destroying a tank? I mean, certainly there's a sense in which this is true, right? But I think this is more reductive than we would necessarily expect to see inside the hobby. So now, okay, so Mo is talking about hobby gaming is general board gaming, Euros, party games, wargaming is playing war games. So hobby gaming... So this is why I'm fishing for new terminology, because I don't think the term hobby gaming really works anymore. because of exactly what Mo's talking about. It's people that get together to play Cards Against Humanity once a month, right? That's hobby gaming, right? As long as it's a somewhat regular thing, then I think it counts as hobby gaming. Whereas that's not something you really saw back in the 70s, right? It was a distinct kind of person that a hobby gamer would have games as their hobby, and that's what they would do regularly. And it was weird. It's not weird now. But the quote unquote hobby gamer playing Cards Against Humanity or whatever it is, or Catan or what have you, that's why I don't think it's a useful term anymore. Adult indoor gaming. This sounds like it might work, but it also will definitely give certain people the wrong idea. And that is not an idea I wish to place in their heads. So there's that. I don't want to really get into this. Feel free in the chat as long as everybody's being polite and cool. But I mean, I do see differences in the way that Euros are designed versus the way Wargames are designed. But there are also counterexamples of Euros that are Euros, and nobody's arguing about that are designed like Wargames, and Wargames, and nobody's arguing about that are designed like Euros. I'm not going to name an example, but there are examples, and if you think hard enough, you will come up with some. So the barrier between Euros and Wargames is not as clear as some people would like to think. That said, we do tend to know when, we're talking about a specific game, Third Reich, well, Struggle of Nations, it's a war game. Nobody's going to argue with that. Other games might sit on the fence, and, Twilight Struggle is one of them. And again, I don't see it as my job to convince anyone that Twilight Struggle is a war game. I think that is not something that I have the energy or interest in doing. All right, I'm really trying to get caught up here. Now, nobody in my family growing up was interested in war games or RPGs at all. That's not to say that they occasionally didn't get yelled at by me until they said, okay, fine. But that was just not a thing that was that was happening inside the family when I was growing up. Oh, shit, no. I don't have this kind of time. I mean, thanks for thinking of me, but no, absolutely not. In a sense, so there are also Euro games with historical themes, right? But for a Euro game, I think I might need to start that statement over. There are Euros with historical themes, and somebody who is into those specific Euros, yeah, you might get them into historical war games. Or if their Euro of choice is something like Eclipse, you might be able to get them into something like Space Empires 4X or something like that. Star Wars Rebellion might have brought some people into. I do see it played at a lot of the conventions I go to, which all tend to be, if not wargaming conventions, then at least conventions where there is wargaming. This is why this is actually the terminology I've used for Twilight Struggle for quite a while, is either that it's wargame adjacent or that it is an honorary wargame. All right, John says that, this would have been cool in the Cold War, but commercial games, unless they're designed with this purpose in mind, tend not to be really all that great for academic use because they tend to be too complicated. They tend to be, okay, here's Twilight Struggle is a 32-page rule book. Everybody learn this by tomorrow. And then you're going to never touch it again. I don't think it's necessarily economical to use those kinds of games for pedagogical purposes. That's not to say that you cannot use games for pedagogical purposes, just that you need to be very careful about what games you're using. No, I don't agree with this. They are really playing, but they are also professional actors. and that colors the style of their play. I have no question that they're like legitimately playing, but they are playing more from the theatrical chair than typical people sitting around a table playing D&D would be, right? Because that's who's playing. And I do think I agree with those folks to some extent anyway, who feel like maybe Critical Role specifically, and possibly some other examples, have maybe set some false expectations for like actual people out in the world doing these kind of games. Oy. Oh. Anyway, I'm trying to get caught up on the chat here. I have played this, actually. Wrath of a Shard, whatever it's called. This is basically D&D Axis and Allies. And you know what? It's fine. It's fine. I did not buy it, however. I did go out and buy Lords of Waterdeep because I thought that was cool. And I don't really have a lot of worker placement games, to be honest. I might have 3, maybe. Something like that. And I can only think of 2 off the top of my head. I would say I've got, so is Risk. Well, Risk is a terrible example. Monopoly is a better example. Where does Monopoly fall? It's clearly not a war game. It's clearly not a Euro game. What do we call it, right? And there's like a whole family of games like that, of traditional family games that you might, play with your spinster aunt or something like that, that don't neatly fit into any of the categories that we so cavalierly throw around on shows like this and other shows, right? I think, yeah, okay, it's been a while. I think there's definitely war game elements to it. There's fighting and stuff in it, so why not? Commands and Colors to me actually feels a little like a miniatures game, in a pleasant way, without the hassle of me having to deal with miniatures. Was this a board game, or was this... adult particularly in this era, calling it an adult fantasy game would probably have definitely given people the wrong idea. All right, Brant had a bunch of discussions getting Wargaming back to the expo, because this is where a lot of the retailers decide what they're going to buy for the next. You got to talk the publishers into showing up. That's the thing. And good luck. You know what? I'm not, as the world's not biggest fan of Axis and Allies. As I've said, however, I have not played Axis and Allies since the original edition, whenever that was. So it could be a substantially different game now, for all I know. But yeah, the Axis and Allies is an excellent gateway game, right? It's strongly themed. It's a World War II thing. You could totally get somebody into a Third Reich or an unconditional surrender from Axis and Allies. No problem. And not that I'm disagreeing with you, Brant, that this is not a great idea. It absolutely is. It's just good. You're going to be swimming upstream. Brant also says that one of the points people keep making is that if the war games aren't even in the room, then they have taken themselves... Well, by people, I assume you mean yourself, because you have made this point, and I agree with you, right? The publishers seem to have been satisfied to remove themselves from the collective conversation of I just thought of a new way to attack the question of what do we call these kinds of gamers. But these kinds of gamers, right? So what do we call the audience of people that go to an event like Origins or Gen Con, right? Because I think it is safe to assume that those people are not that casual, right? Because they are going, unless they happen to live in Indianapolis or Columbus, they are going out of their way, traveling potentially across the country or even to a foreign country to go to this event to participate in this stuff. Now, at Origins, I haven't been to Gen Con in ages, but it's probably similar. You could play, you could play war games, you could play miniatures games, you could play RPGs, you could play board games, you could play card games, you could play poker, you could play a limited selection of digital games that it is in no sense worth going there for, unless that digital game is the Artemis Spaceship Bridge Simulator, which is awesome. Or the Battletech pods, if those are still there. I'm not even sure. So Kyle Harris, thanks for stopping in. Renegade Games is the current licensee from Hasbro, responsible for Axis and Allies and a bunch of other things. So what do we call gamers? I mean, that's kind of what we call them. And maybe that's sufficient. Is that sufficient? Maybe it is. When we say gamers, we don't necessarily mean anybody who has played a game ever. We probably mean somebody that is reasonably engaged with games, whatever kind of games those are. All right, we are officially caught up to the chat. Are we talking about U-boat again? Do we have to? Must we? And now I will point out that you can get D&D at Target now, right? Which it was not something that's not new news. You have been able to for the past several years. And I'm using D&D as an example because everybody knows what it is, and it's hit a mass market sort of cachet that war games never have, and likely are never to. I think we probably war games as a mass market phenomenon, that story probably ends at Twilight Struggle. And it might continue at some point with an eventual successor to Twilight Struggle. Good. That's great. That's great. But you got to talk to actual people that are responsible for showing up at these things to show up at these things. Right? I am happy to hear that people agree with you, because I agree with you too. Unfortunately, many of the publishers don't. And what you got to find is somebody based out of Tennessee or Kentucky, or possibly Ohio, to show up at these things. So talk to Uva. He's not that close. Capstone Games is in Cincinnati, though. That's not too far away. And I'm sure there's somebody else, right? The Last Crusade. Oh, I think we bought decks of this and then never actually figured it out. I think this is totally true, and I don't know what the numbers are for Gamma Expo, but it's probably similar. The cost to attend Origins as a publisher is really high. It's not the kind of thing where you can find like a small regional convention and maybe give them $200 to have a table in the dealer's room for the weekend. Origins, it's many, and Gen Con is going to be the same way, and probably Gamma Trade Show is the same way. It's going to cost many thousands of dollars. And that kind of trip, because remember, it's not just one person. You got to send a whole team of people out. And if it's two people sitting behind that table in the dealer's room the whole time for like 12 hours a day, those people are going to be exhausted. They're not going to engage. You got to keep people that are doing that fresh, which means you need the right people. And you probably need at least 6 people to run one little booth, right? You got to fly all those people, or you got to get all those people out to Columbus or Indianapolis or Louisville or wherever it is. So, and that's, over and above what do the hotels cost? What does the tables cost? What is admissions cost? If that's an additional cost. So there's a lot. Yeah, well, that's a great question, Mo, and I am not positive. I mean, Gamma still exists. Is Gamma a thing? You are asking, what exactly is Gamma accomplishing on an annual basis? Then I am not sure what the answer to that question is. So, now Real Time says, chess is the real gateway to board war games. Kids that have interest in chess will most likely be enthralled by wargaming. That's how he progressed. I am not about to argue with your lived experience in this department. However, I will tell you that while I had some mild interest in chess as a kid, I got away from chess pretty early and got involved in other kinds of games. And to this day, I don't dislike chess per se, but I'm just not into it particularly. Now, is that unusual? I'm not sure that it is unusual in war games, but I know there's plenty of war games who are very serious war gamers who are very serious chess players. Yeah, because let's gouge the retailers instead. Anyway. So, well, yeah. So this is indisputably true. Who did I ask? Damn it, I forget who I asked. I asked a publisher, "Are you a member of Gamma?" And they didn't even know. I don't think that Gamma is performing, except to the extent that it is permitted at Origins to have a wargaming area. I don't think that Gamma is really doing anything for wargamers right now, and I'm not positive that any wargame publishers are members of Gamma. I might be wrong. I don't know. Brant, you're there. Are there any wargame publishers there other than Renegade and possibly Academy Games? I mean, I don't know if this is true, but I also it's not transparent to me what benefit Gamma is serving other than running a couple of large and reasonably successful conventions. So, I don't know if this was. I remember hearing about this. I don't know if it was Command or something else, but I do remember hearing about this. Well, Mark Herman is a big chess guy too. So I think Mark is on the board or something like that of the big chess club in New York City that's been a chess club for like 200 years or something like that. Oh yeah, totally. Totally. Oh yeah, I remember these. This has got to be hilarious. There were somewhere in the 50s, 60s, 70s issue numbers of Dragon Magazine, they had a series of issues with chess-themed fantasy covers. And every once in a while in future issues, they would call back and have another chess-themed fantasy thing. And those were pretty cool covers, in fact. I assume that there's just these folks just don't have anything better to do than get mad at something existing that they don't care about. I don't have this kind of time to be mad at this. Am I interested in it? Not at all. Do I need to lose sleep over it? That'd be asinine, and I'm not doing that. Okay, now I could see this. Well, apparently somebody we know is not taking part in their shipping discounts program. Are we talking about chess here, Stigler? Because I would imagine this happens. And don't forget that chess had a big resurgence of interest in recent years, too, with Magnus Carlsen, who's a big celebrity chess player now, and The Queen's Gambit on Netflix, which I watched. It was good. So... I could see this being useful, I guess. I don't know how often. Yeah, okay. I guess I could see that. And if so, cool. But most retailers, I can count the number of game stores, retail game stores, that I'm aware of that carry war games at all on two hands. I know there's more than that, but that's what I can name off the top of my head. A couple of those are in Ohio, and a couple of those are not in Ohio. Places like Noble Knight, or the Sentry Box in Canada, or the whatever the place is in Montreal, or the Gamers Armory down in Cary, North Carolina, or the Complete Strategist in New York. These are places that carry war games. In Ohio. Okay, so there was a place in Akron called Kenmore Comics and Games for a long time mostly did comics, but actually had an excellent game selection as well. And I went in there shortly after we moved up here, and I was like very surprised and pleased by the selection of current war games that they had, which is of course like 90% GMT. They unloaded their games to another store that opened in Fairlawn called Nine Realms Comics and Games, which is also mostly a comic store. But also does have some games. And they still have a few of those GMT games left. It doesn't look like they've restocked any of that stuff. And in fact, it doesn't really look like they do much in the way of games, to be honest. Maybe the board games are going, because they've got a bunch of those, but they don't even have that much D&D stuff. There's the Guard Tower, which tends to have a halfway decent selection of new GMT product and a smattering of other things. There's the Soldiery in Columbus, which historically has carried war games, but the last couple times I've been in there, they've had basically nothing. There's a place called the Tin Soldier in Dayton that last time I was there had war games, but that's like 15 years ago. Are there any? So this is a great question. So Diamond Comics Distribution, which owns Alliance, which is pretty much the big name in games distribution, is currently doing some kind of bankruptcy or financial struggle or something. So nobody's really sure how that's going to play out. The entire games distribution system could be on the precipice of collapse for all we know. In which case, what we are likely to see is game stores not necessarily going away, although that's bound to happen too, but carrying a more narrow selection of products because they have to deal directly with the publishers. Alliance, yes, that Alliance. Now, supposedly Alliance was a little bit insulated from the bigger problems that Diamond had, but I don't know to what extent that's true. So you guys can do the research if you want. Bridge Distribution, there you go. Go to Bridge Distribution instead. They can't be as bad as Alliance. Games Plus. Yeah, I've heard good things about Games Plus, Octavian. Thanks for stopping by the way. I've heard really good things about Games Plus. I've just never been there. I didn't really want to stop in Chicago on the way up to Madison, going to Noble Knight. Although it was considered because I wanted to stop at Binny's for scotch, and we ended up getting everything we needed in Madison instead. So we did not need to stop in Chicago on the way home. But I've heard great things about Games Plus. But we have Games Minus here in Ohio. That's what we got. Now there is the Warzone in Cleveland, which boy, they've got a lot of product. But boy, I don't know how the fire marshal has not shut that place down. It is a death trap. So, and it must be seen to be believed. If you are going to go there, and I do recommend you go there, if you are not claustrophobic, bring a flashlight. I'm not even kidding, because there's hardly any lights in the store. It's absolutely crazy, but they do have a lot of product, an insane amount of product. Asmodee, yeah, we'll see how that's going to work out too. I was pretty salty about the whole whatever company it was that bought a bunch of companies up and then offloaded all of the debt that they had accrued onto Asmodee and spun it off. How is that legal? But apparently it is. So there you go. All right, we'll be getting rid of this individual. Just a moment, folks, while we figure out how to block somebody on Twitch again. There you go. Block. Have a nice day. All right. At least I didn't have to take a lot of time to figure it out. No, that was not Asmodee. Asmodee didn't buy anything. They got bought. Miniatures Market got sold to somebody. I don't think it was the same company. I hope not. Sean Sullivan down in Australia. You know what? To check, call up Australian Design Group. Ask Harry. That's the best thing I could think of to do, is ask Harry what they may even have something on the website to see if they have like a list of retailers that carry their products, and then start looking at those places. But you folks down in Australia, New Zealand have been taking it in the shorts for many, many, many years on shipping. So I feel bad. All right, Cardboard Commander, thanks for stopping by. Congratulations on hitting 1,000 subscribers. There's some good content there, folks. Subscribe to Cardboard Commander if you have not done so already. Speaking of bad website, wow, is the Paizo Publishing website a hot, steaming loaf of bullshit? That website sucks. I'm not sure that... This is a great question, actually. It's completely speculative, but I think it's an interesting question. Could somebody step in and buy GMT out? I mean, maybe. I don't know what the ownership situation looks like at GMT. Is it like a three-way split like it was when they got founded? Did it get founded that way? I don't even know that. So who knows what would have to happen for that to occur? Certainly, I have not heard anything to that effect. All right, folks. We are just about out of time. There you go. So there you go. There's a bunch of Gamma member business services and discounts on their site. So you know, I'm glad that they're doing something. Paizo made a pass at trying to do digital themselves a few years ago with Pathfinder Online. That did not succeed. At this point, Paizo's digital push appears to be just from a licensing standpoint. There have been 2 Pathfinder games I can think of off the top of my head, Kingmaker and Wrath of the Righteous, both of which were done by Larian or Obsidian. You can get them on Steam. I played a little bit of both of them. They're both pretty good. And there's an Apocalypse Vaults or Armageddon, whatever the vaults are called. There's another one coming out there as well. So, yeah, hopefully. Oh, my God. How awful would that be? It's a terrible. You're going to give me nightmares here, Joe. Thanks. Yeah, you know, this is true, though. Look at the hundreds of Avalon Hill games that they don't even maintain the paperwork on anymore. So, all right, folks, we are out of time. So I want to thank everybody for coming out tonight. If you haven't done so already, please do like the video, subscribe to the channel. Big shout out once again to the patrons of Ardwulf's Lair, without whom we could not keep doing this. And a big shout out to Rich, Arthur, and Jason, who are our new patrons for this week. So thanks, folks. I really appreciate that. Don't forget, we have a new Noble Knight campaign for the revised War in Europe. So check out the affiliate link in the video description. We will be back on Sunday with the Chit Show with a very special guest who I have to figure out who that is going to be. And then we'll be back next Monday with this counterclipping show. Until then, everybody have a great rest of the night.